Thanks, Dominic, and thank you to everybody for coming out. We've had, I think it's an awesome turnout. I love to see the energy, the enthusiasm. Hopefully, lots of cool ideas that are coming out of this. We're gonna kick things off. Our background is coming from a lot of product development and academia kind of combined. And so, what I want to address in the first presentation is as we talk about VR as this new creative medium, I want to point out some of the things that we've seen as conference organizers and as liaisons with research institutions, things that we think are interesting that are coming up that sort of point to why VR has a very powerful future. And then Alissia in particular is going to talk you through some of her ideas on the creative process and on the product development process. Cool. There you go. I got it. Okay, so this is kind of my intro to virtual reality, which was a very odd reality. When I was doing research in northern Kenya with a friend of mine about 7 years ago, and we were in northern Kenya trying to understand social change in that area influenced by technology. And one of the problems that we had when we were there is we thought, how can we bring this research environment kind of alive to our students? And we had all these brainstorms about how we could kind of make a 360 camera kind of fit together. And, we wish we'd had one of these cool things like the Theta S, like they have over there. Because we really wanted to find a way to bring students in to the experience we were having, because we saw there was a big disconnect between how we learned as researchers and how the students learned in the classroom. So as the researchers, we would go into an environment like this, we would have no idea what was happening, we would have to ask lots of questions, and then over time we would kind of piece together an image of how this system worked. But when we talked to the students, they would see a finished report. So they would see all of the finished ideas and then maybe a photograph. And it didn't really spark curiosity in them because it didn't present them with a question of what is going on. So we thought if we could capture that in 360 in some way, that would be a really interesting way to put them into, kind of flip the learning, to put them into these situations that were strange and then force them to ask questions. And so at that time, that led me researching like who was doing any interesting work in this, and it led me to this guy, which I think some of you know well. If you don't know him, please check out one of his presentations, one of his lectures. He has a wonderfully weird style of like kind of freaking people out and then blowing their minds with ideas. So he was one of the first. This is kind of the godfather of virtual reality, I think, as a lot of you know. But this idea that he had that when we look at a technology, the thing that's exciting about the technology is not the technology itself, it's how that technology changes us. That's the thing that I really grab onto when I look at VR. Because the exciting things that I see happening in VR are kind of how they return us to who we have always been and how they open up a doorway for us to understand ourselves in new ways. So this is that graph when I think of like how technology changes people. This is this weird historical moment I think we're in right now where we've come all the way to this point that we've narrowed ourselves with the information technology we have into this very kind of handicapped, immobile state. And the immobile state has blocked us, I think. I think we're actually in this weird technology trap at the moment. The information technology we had liberated us from being disconnected. It liberated us from not having enough information. But now it's trapped us in another way because by the design of the technology, it's cutting us off from our bodies and from our environments. And everything that we're learning through cognitive science about how we make sense of the world is telling us that it's that combination of the mind, the body, and the environment together that help us really make sense of things, help us really learn things. So I think back of like where we had come from. Where we've come from, I mean, this is actually where I come from. This is Colorado in the United States. Where we've come from are these very rich environments where we needed intense spatial cognition abilities. We needed to develop over millions of years intense spatial memories and the ability to relate to each other spatially. So we needed to know, where did we go to get the water? Where were the berries? Where was the bear hiding? And this is also how we've developed as a kind of a dominant species in the planet, is because we have this incredibly long period of time in which we're able to engage in social play with each other. And it's that physical relationship, having the brain, the body, and the environment connected when we're in a social relationship, that opens up our ability to master our environments. So this is one of the reasons that we have the sort of the social power that we do in the planet. And all of the technology that we've had now is flattening that, is cutting us off in a sense. And when we get cut off from the body, a couple of really bad things happen. The first one is that we get cut off from a good awareness of what's happening in our emotions. Because the emotions, we have a misunderstanding that emotions are something that happen in the head, when actually what the research is showing us is that emotions are actually a physical experience that is interpreted by parts of the brain. So we can't really make a clear distinction between the brain and the body. So this is actually a map of, this is over 6 different cultures mapping out areas of heightened or lowered sensitivity when these emotions are experienced. And they have a lot of research that's indicating that what we have when we experience an emotion is a physical response first, that the brain later interprets. So there's a wonderful experiment with decks of cards, and in the experiment, like in the basic experiment, they asked people to turn over cards that would give them some indication of whether they were good or bad. If it was a high number of cards or a low number of cards, they would end up winning or losing money. And what they found is that people were getting stress responses very, very, very early when they would reach for the bad deck of cards. Even though later, maybe 10 turns of a card later, they would cognitively understand, oh, this is a bad deck. And if we're cut off for our emotions, this is a very important thing that handicaps our learning. So what you're looking at right now, this is a video of basically neurons connecting and creating synapses. So this is the biological root of memory. This is from the work of Eric Kandel, who works at NYU, who's a Nobel Prize-winning biologist, discovering the roots of memory. And what they've discovered is that when you have emotions, those emotions actually multiply the number of synapses that are formed between neurons. So if we cut off our relationship to our body in some ways, and we diminish our capacity to connect to emotion, we're also diminishing our fundamental capacity to learn. And this is where the technologies that you guys and you ladies are interested in, that I think opens up a really exciting doorway, which is now that we start to get involved in spatial technologies and we're putting the computing out into the world in a sense, that's opening up the doorway for us to again complete this mind-body environment loop. And this is one of the areas where I think, like, when we look at AR and we ask what's going to happen, I'm sure we will see things like this. I am very skeptical that this is the future of things that we will actually find personally meaningful. So when I look at this and I think of this idea that I see sometimes in design ideas coming out of a community, which is, oh, now I have the ability to take more screens and put more information up in front of the user. And I think this actually leads to the state of mind that Tony Stark is in right now, which he just looks like sad and confused in a way. I think really what we're talking about when we talk about interesting use cases, the things that are going to be powerful, the things that will uniquely define these technologies as opposed to the technologies that precede them, are ones that we really involve more of the body-mind environment loop. And so this is one of the reasons I think a lot of you have looked at this, the exciting work that's being done by Unity, the exciting work that's been done by Unreal, where they're bringing the actual game design engines. The engines are being put into VR so we can build VR in VR. I think we're going to be seeing a lot more exciting tools like this, because what this does, in essence, is it reconnects that connection to what it is we are physically doing and how the environment is responding, which, for one, speeds up the process of learning. We have a lot of studies that show that. But they also deepen our capacity for remembering what happens in those spatial environments. And this is another one, I think maybe Johnny Novak is here. When we're seeing a lot of the work that's being done, or we see some of the work that's been done in the front with VR backpacks, like allowing people to move freely in the environments is enormously powerful. And if you want to look at some of the academic work that's being done, some of the research that's being done, I think you can take a look at some of the great work that's being done in embodied design research laboratories, like you see at UCal Berkeley. Now, UCal Berkeley, they're focused on mathematics education, but I think what they're showing is there are these very powerful modes of learning that are accessed by embodying the information, embodying the relationship to the information. And we can also see this, there's a number of them. If you just look up embodied design, we have a number of research institutions around the world that I think are making great advances in helping us really understand what does embodied cognition really mean, and how do we take that knowledge and build it into the design of technologies. So a couple examples that are personal favorites from mine from the last year, from groups that we've interacted with. I think some of you have seen Mindshow, and Mindshow has this nice advance where Mindshow is allowing you to animate different avatars. But the key thing that they're doing there is they're allowing you to record the motion of the avatars, so you can create kind of one-person plays or dramas, which is a nice way of being able to share the social experience, even in things that aren't real-time. Altspace VR has just taken that same basic concept and put it into Altspace, and for them, I think it opens up this two-sided advantage, which is, for one, Altspace is really premised on this idea of having virtual events that people can attend. But what do you do when all of their events that they're looking at, I mean, there's 7 p.m. Eastern and I'm in Germany. I'm not going to stay up till 5 o'clock in the morning to watch a VR comedian. So being able to record what the avatar is doing allows you to scale that out, allows you to take that social experience and have it replicated over different time zones. But it also allows you to reflect back on what it is you're doing. And this is, I think, a really interesting area that I start to see people experimenting with, which is how do we understand ourselves by engaging in virtual worlds, by reflecting on ourselves. And one last little experiment that I want to touch on that I think opens a cool window in this. This was an experiment that was done, I don't know, some of you might be familiar with this, an experiment that was done at the Stanford Virtual Human Interaction Laboratory. And what they were trying to understand is what is the impact of being able to relate to ourselves if we are changed in some way. So they took groups of students and they created a control group that had their faces scanned and had 3D models made of them. And they were put into a virtual environment with a virtual mirror. So you'd walk into a room, you'd see yourself, and you're asked to kind of talk to yourself. Well, the second group had their faces artificially aged. They were made to look older. And then they had that same engagement. They went in front of a virtual mirror and they engaged for an hour with an older version of themselves. So I'd throw this question out to the audience. Do you think there would be any change between these two groups, or would there be any difference in their behavior after this experience? Do you think this would affect people in any meaningful way? How? Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, well, I guess if you walk into a room and see yourself, but like an older version of yourself in a mirror, it's more peculiar. I think that people would have a more distant relationship to that.
If it would be peculiar, like it would be strange to see an older version of yourself, do you think it would affect your behavior in any way? Would it change you in any way?
I think maybe at first. So I'd reckon that for a first period of time, it might be. But after that, I mean, they probably recognize themselves somewhat. So I guess it's just for a first period of time, I'd say.
So you think the behavior change would be in the experience itself? Like in the experiment, you might relate to yourself differently. Maybe you'd be slower. Maybe you'd offer yourself a chair or something like that. But you don't think there would be any behavior change afterwards, do you?
You mean when they're done with the experiment?
Yeah,
right?
when they're done with the experiment, when they go home, would there be any difference in their behavior then? We get.
I guess you'd feel more responsible for yourself if you see yourself older, and you act more, like careful with yourself. Maybe you decide to eat other things, more healthy,
Okay.
etc.
So you think there might be like a behavior response where someone who saw the older version of themselves would have a better diet afterwards?
For example, yeah.
Yeah, maybe. Interesting idea. So yeah, one more? Yes.
So the research known to me says that you behave older after that. You behave like an old man. You get out and you feel, oh, Alice, I'm slow, I'm old, I cannot think that good, I have bad memory. This is an impact which holds on even after the immersive experience.
So it changes you, right? It has some
changes you after the experience. So it changes you.
So if you talked about acting old or feeling old, what specific behavior do you think you might see that would be different between these two groups?
Slow motion.
Slow motion. Okay, so one group would walk slower, get on the bus more carefully.
That's it.
Or order softer foods. Okay, one of the things that they looked at, and I think it's an interesting window into what happens when we reflect in this way. The group that interacted with the older version of themselves saved twice as much money over the following year. Yeah. Than the control group that interacted with the normal version of themselves. So you had long-term behavior change that was triggered by a 1-hour experience in a virtual environment. Okay, this is like I think like kind of cracking open a doorway into looking at what we're dealing with when we start working with this power, and we're closing that loop, mind, body, and environment, especially when we're focused on experiences that cause us to reflect onto ourselves or to see ourselves in different ways. In our own work, we're trying to apply these ideas as we go with our clients. We've got a project right now with the Royal Opera House in London, and what we're doing with them is we're taking their design challenge of how do they take the experience of ballet, how do they take the experience of opera and transport it in a way to a new audience that might not be interested in coming to. Maybe that's what we could do. We could have people see themselves as older, and then they would think, well, I'm old now, I should go to the ballet. Well, what we've done is we're playing with different ideas of how can we actually capture that physical experience of dance and transport that to new audiences. So we teamed up with a nice startup out of Saarbrücken called the Captury, and what we were doing is we're doing some kind of early test work using markerless motion capture to capture the dancers in action. So what you're seeing here is skeletal data that's captured live just based off of machine vision from these cameras. And using this, I mean, this is a very kind of rough test as we were showing here, but using this kind of information to create avatars that then we can build into virtual experiences that people can go into. So either they can be on the dance floor themselves with this action happening around them, or they can go into the body of the dancer themselves to see what the motions are like. We have interesting research showing that there's a very strong learning improvement that happens when you're able to physically match your self-motion with an avatar motion, also out of Stanford. So if anybody wants to talk about how that works, I can share some of the research with you later. And now I'll pass it on to Alissia. So what I have seen and what I think is really exciting are the way that this technology in some way brings us back to who we already are, brings us back to what we already do very well, and not just liberates us from the flatness of the screen, but connects us to ourselves in ways that are very ancient and very powerful. But it's a huge design challenge. How do we go about doing that? How do we go about making money doing that? And this is where I'll hand it off to Alissia.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you, Kimo. And I think it's important, before we start getting into the discussion of tools, the discussion of projects, the discussion of budgets, that we really understand how we can incorporate the mind, the body, and our environment into an experience. So I'm here today to share with you some of my experience over the past years. And you see here my comfort zone. And I started 10 years ago, actually pretty close here in Wolfsburg. and I was doing product placement for games at VW. So all the Need for Speed cars, the VWs, and 10 years ago this was like the hottest thing you can do in marketing because you got the 3D models, you can work with game producers and developers and artists, so that was really fun. And what I continued in doing, I joined a studio, a US-based company that I ran in Munich, and we were specialized in pairing large German brands with unreleased technology. So when I started 7 years ago, it was the iPad, then it came over to Kinect and gesture-based control, then it came to wearable technology. And we were the first group here in Germany that got to play with Google Glass in close cooperation with the Google X team. This was our first project 3 years ago. And we started working with augmented reality and with virtual reality later, up to HoloLens right now. So, as I said, today I want to give you some tools for the weekend that you can actually apply in your work and that I think is very, very important to consider. So with virtual reality, we're accessing our visual sense. And 50% of what we perceive of the world is captured through our eyes. So 50% of what we see, what we feel, how we make our decisions is based on the visual sense. So it's very, very clear that tools like design thinking and human-centered design will be key for developing an experience because we're as close to the human as never before. So anyone who has not looked at human-centered design or design thinking should really brush up on your skills this weekend or next week at home. Ooh. The second very important methodologies are agile development methods. So pairing human-centered design, user experience with agile development methodology will also be key. But today, I don't want to talk about design thinking and I don't want to talk about agile, but I want to talk about creativity. And both of those tools will be important, but how do we access our creative superpowers when working on VR? That was the big question that interests me the most. And right now, I want to tell you, my background is business, product development, making product plans, working with brands, agencies, developers, designers. So I always told myself the story, well, I'm not the creative type. I don't need to be creative in my work, you know. Designers are responsible for creativity. And this is, so I want you to think about what kind of stories you tell yourself to kind of push creativity away from you. And this weekend, we want to imagine virtual worlds. And I encourage you to imagine virtual worlds that go beyond what I read in every client briefing these days, the wow factor. The factor that will just make audiences just wow, because they're going to be wowed for at least maximum 2 minutes. But how do we envision our interactions in those worlds? When we use the full potential of including our body, including the environment, how do we imagine those worlds? How do we get our states back to that? And I see every time, the first experience was when one of my developers put on the VR headset and he took it off and he said, wow, I can be anywhere I want and I can be anyone I want. So what do I do when I don't have any limitations in those worlds? And what is the story you tell yourself when you try to be creative, when you're working on a project? I don't have time to be creative, or there's no ROI on creativity for me. So what's the point? Because as Kimo said, as children, every one of us is born with a creative mind. But as we go through our education system, we kind of get rid of it. We focus on efficiency. So today, I want to give you a free guide for improving your creative practice. So the first very important step is immersion. So I think here everyone has tried out a VR headset, but this is, if you haven't, you need to immerse yourself. You need to ask the question, what is it? What can it do? What is the tool? And really try it out. The second step is connecting new dots. It's not just asking what the technology is, but what it means for me, for my company, my startup, and me maybe as a developer or a designer that it works independently. You need to look at what customers need, what customer insights departments can tell you about what your customer demand is. You need to look into cognitive science. Cognitive science is the science of how we learn, how we perceive things. As I said, 50% of the perception goes through our visual system. You need to look into anthropology. And Kimo was talking about our nice case with the Royal Opera House. We do not start with them and start developing a wild VR experience, but we ask ourselves, what did a cultural experience mean in the past? What does it mean now? And what will be an immersive spectacle will mean to the audiences of the future? And we have the Royal Opera House, the institution that does this for a couple hundred years now. So we have a lot of knowledge to tap into to develop the immersive spectacle of the future. The third step, and was the hardest one for me, is allowing imagination. You have to allow yourself to just have this free time where you just collect all those informations and ask yourself, what could VR be? And things like this weekend, events, hackathons, where we in person come together and exchange ideas. This is the magic which only human beings can do together, because doing a hackathon only online will not get us to solving complex, more interesting problems. It will only work with direct interaction. We have a lot of answers to how virtual worlds could look like in sci-fi. So there's standard literature for going into VR worlds. And who has read Ready Player One here? All right, couple guys. It's an amazing book, Ready Player One from Ernest Cline. It talks about VR worlds and how they're structured, how we learn, go to school in VR. Snow Crash from Neil Stephenson is another base literature for foreseeing how immersive technologies will impact or could impact our lives in the future. And those books, I think Snow Crash is from the 80s. So we don't even need to really think ourselves. We just need to look into some basic literature to just get our creativity started and allow it. Art is an important factor of it. Art has always been the place where creatives of a certain time, psychologists of a certain time, come together with artists and express what's moving society, how our world functions, and what works and what doesn't. So allowing imagination, asking the question, what could VR be, is an important tool for that. And I think the most important step for each and every one of you here is not to ask, what is VR and what can we build with it, but what can I contribute personally? What is my unique skill that I can bring to the technology and make the technology better and more meaningful? And again, the example with the Royal Opera House. This institution has over hundreds of years experience in immersive spectacles in rooms. Using this knowledge, it's a treasure to bring this into a VR inscenated spectacle, as you can see. And so ask yourself, what can you contribute today that is your unique skill that can be interesting and valuable in virtual reality? And I'm sure each and every one of you will have something different, something unique, based on your experience, your education, the way where you've been raised and how you've been raised and what you've learned over all your life. So a first tool I want to show you that does not include any technology. This is completely analog. Because in VR, you are somebody, right? You have a body. So when you create an idea this weekend, not only talk about it, but take your group members and play it out. So one person will be the user, and the scenario will be like a theatrical theater, basically, of how you will feel in VR. This is the best simulation of your VR before you actually start developing. And ask the person who is supposed to be the user, like this guy on the chair, how he feels when he interacts with the people around you. Because that's a very close simulation, and it comes directly from theater and role games that can bring us into an experience before we even start programming anything. So this is the VR version of embodied design, of sketching, of prototyping with sketching and paper and pencil. So try that out. I want to see a lot of theater plays going on in the hackathon room before you even start coding. And what happened here, and this is where we trained a game studio in Hamburg. This was the first day they started playing around with it. This is a while ago. This was last year. And the second day, they had one night to rest. And that's very important. I think it's good that this hackathon takes place over multiple days, because you go home, your brain processes the information, and the next day you come back fresh. And what you're able to do, and what this team was able to do, on the next day, after all those ideas about VR have sunk down, they've been able to leverage their skills from game design right into VR in the right way, considering the mind, the body, and the environment. So use those tools and let us know what you think and how they work out for you. For us, it works out very, very well with our clients. And what can you contribute today? What can you contribute the next days? What is your unique skill and capacity? So now I want to talk a little bit about the business side. How do I start? How do I start creating a VR experience if I'm a developer wanting to build something for a big brand or a new product? Or if I'm a brand, I want to hire some people to engage with VR. And from my experience, every time I start a big project with a creative agency, a large brand, and a development agency, everybody is super excited. We feel like pioneers and the energy is high and everything is going to be perfect. But most of the time, it's not. So I recommend to avoid losing money, losing energy, and losing resources and having a product that will be over budget and not satisfactory for everyone, to follow a simple process. So I want to do an exercise with you, and let's pretend we have a timeline and we start this month and we want to start kicking off a project. So this could be a potential guideline that you can follow. The most important thing when you have people from different disciplines, and here, how many developers do we have here right now? A couple? Okay. How many designers do we have here right now? Wonderful. I know we have a gender expert over here. Please raise your hand, Diana. We have a person who doesn't know a lot about VR yet. She's here just to learn about the technology. But what she brings is she understands how genders, what they prefer and what they need in their experience. So work with Diana this weekend and see how different genders can influence things. And so who's from the project management business side? Perfect. We have a wonderful mix of very diverse people. And what's very important is that, I use Diana, I use it as an example. She doesn't know a lot about VR. So what's important is that you bring Diana up to speed. In order to create a good product, we need a shared language in the team. So whoever you work with, be sure you have the same understanding of the technology. Because if I go out on the street and if I ask somebody, do you know what virtual reality is? A lot of people will say yes. But this can mean different things. This can mean they have tried Google Cardboard once for 5 minutes, or this can mean they're, fit with HoloLens and HTC Vive. So a shared language is something you should do when you start this month, to create a shared language in your team and start working with ideation techniques. The second step in January, and that's the holidays, you kind of let it in, let it sink in and let your mind work what could be interesting in your team. You should get together with a developer, latest at that time, to really validate the use cases you've created and validate them technically and how much time every party would need to execute and what a roadmap could look like. Then a very, very important stage is, this is when you start budgeting. This is when when every party starts, because everybody has the same language about the technology, everybody has an understanding what we're building and why, and if it works. Now all agencies should start getting into the budget discussion and calculating how much effort would go into it. And then you start the production, and this is where you work with prototypes, milestones, user testing. Always implement user testing into your process based on design thinking. Very, very clear point. And then you can go into your milestones in every review. I want to show some losing strategies before we close up the session. Losing strategies would be expecting the VR guru or expert to save you. A lot of people, and I think in Germany we're a market that is specifically focused on experts. Like, oh, we need help in this, we invite the experts for that. I can tell you, I've been working in VR for the last 5 years now, and I don't consider myself an expert because right now, as I speak, 15,000 startups are being created. Like, a lot of new tools are coming to the market that I don't know about. So do not trust the guru. Do not be the guru. Be an organization that moves from trusting to experts, but involving continuous learning in your process into your team. And this does not have to be a big organization. This can be your startup team. Learning and being up to date with the newest partners, technologies, tools, networks should be in the core of your project team to be successful. Another losing strategy, oh, see, that's funny that it's hidden. So hoard your information. So this is another German thing. We like to be very close with the information we have. And really, this is considered an advantage that we have if we know a secret. With VR, AR, artificial intelligence, this does not work like that. even with AI research, Facebook and Google have open source labs where they share the knowledge, because we need to really differentiate ourselves from thinking that artificial intelligence will be invented by a hacker in Alaska somewhere. It will be developed by the community. So be in the community. So you're at the right place, exchanging ideas, exchanging thoughts, exchanging information. So don't hoard your ideas and be open. Another thing is, don't just focus on how you can monetize the VR app tomorrow. This will maybe get you to an app that has a price to it in the App Store, but this will not get you to a valuable experience. It is an important point, and I will touch on that in a second, that money is made. But for a creative, valuable work, monetization should not be the first point on your agenda. And don't expect a clean process. We're working with a lot of uncertainty. We're working with a lot of unfinished prototype hardware. And the hardware we have now is the clunkiest, most unuseful, worst we have right now. And it's going to be improving over the years. So don't expect everything to go smoothly. Don't expect everything to work out. Be prepared for, a lot of things to happen. And this is my last point. And this is a very critical point, and this is a point that's very, very important to me, because I've been in the industry of emerging technology development for the last 10 years, and I've seen a lot of companies, and I see this happening right now, that big brands come to developers, to development studios, and ask them for free work. Because, well, you can get my brand on your experience, isn't that great? A call out to every brand here in the room. The people that are here right now on the weekend, learning, getting even to this place to be able to program, to design, to concept and experience, have invested a lot of time getting there, a lot of their personal time, a lot of their personal money. So every brand that is in the room should consider themselves to be as fair to offer those people fair budgets. And on the other side, every developer in this room should claim his value being a pioneer in this field. Because if we don't do this, if we don't ask for value exchange, we will not be here this year. All developers will not be here, the OEMs will not be here, the CBIT will not be here, because there's no exhibitors that can, participate in this thing. So it's very, very important, and this is my last slide and my message to you. This weekend, be very, very generous with your ideas. Learn, share your learning, learn yourself, but do not be generous with your time moving out of here. Because this is the most critical thing I see in the industry, that the market is already being, very vulnerable due to those relationships that happen. So I hope we could give you good tools and a good insight. And if you have any questions, we'll be here later. Just reach out to us, and thank you very much. Do you have any questions? Do we have time for questions? Yeah, I think we have 5 minutes for questions if you have.
Okay. No questions?
No questions? Okay.